the rate of single men in the US looking for dates has declined. I mean, right now it's extremely low. About 90% of men are opting out of dating at this point. They're avoiding dates, they're avoiding relationships, they're focusing on themselves. A lot of guys are no longer leaving their homes on a regular basis. If they do, it's only to go out and do the most important of things or to work. Beyond that, they're staying home, they're building home gyms, they're getting things done. A lot of guys are looking for remote work as well. They're finding that they can stay inside, play video games, and just live their lives. This is the reason why you have, the alphabet police, coming after a lot of guys at home. They're trying to find out what videos men are watching. They're trying to find out what video games men are playing. They're trying to listen in on the chats of these video games because men are dropping out of society and they're like trying to figure out what's going on. All of these men are leaving Western society. If they're not leaving the country, they're basically ghosting in society and staying away from society as much as possible. They're abandoning relationships in Western society. They're not dating, they're not marrying, they're not having children, they're not having conversations. They're not even, the rates at which men are being physically intimate has significantly fallen. It's gone from over a year to years where most men are no longer being physically intimate with women for years at a time, and then they're getting blamed for this on top of everything else, saying that it's because online dating has made it so easy for men that why this is happening. And it's amazing they don't seem to understand that while the entire simp economy has moved online, while most dating is now done online, or at least arranged online, most of the guys who are getting these dates who are going out, it's a very small percentage of men. And then you have to understand that most of the men that women are going on dates with on these apps, they don't even like these men. They're just looking for money from these men. Guys, let's jump into the video because I think it's really insightful.
Last week, I delved here into recent data from the CDC suggesting major problems with regard to the mental health of our adolescents, surges in depression and suicidal ideation, especially true for our girls. This week, I found cause to worry about young men. This headline from The Hill, it caught my eye. Most young men are single. Most young women are not. The story reported that as of 2022, Pew Research Center found 30% of U.S. adults are neither married, living with a partner, nor engaged in a committed relationship. Nearly half of all young adults are single. Now, look at these numbers. 34% of women, twice as many, a whopping 63% of men. What explains that? I pulled the Pew study and I read with interest. Turns out since 2019, the share of single men who say they're looking for dates or a relationship has declined from 61% to 50%. In 2018, 28% of men ages 18 to 30 reported they'd had no sex in the past year, compared with 18% of women of that age. The Hill report said men in their 20s are more likely than women in their 20s to be romantically uninvolved, sexually dormant, friendless, and lonely. They stand at the vanguard of an epidemic of declining marriage, sexuality, and relationships that afflicts all of young America.
And I want to point out that this data is a couple of years old. Okay, this story actually came from 2023, February 2023, and that data is from prior years. So as you guys can see, it's actually a couple of years old. All right. So in 2024, what it actually is right now, it's probably, like I said, it's well over 75%. 90. The last numbers we saw actually said about 90% of men were avoiding relationships, avoiding dating entirely. So I mean, this is the mouse utopia that we're witnessing here. Guys are completely opting out of these relationships, and there's some serious implications for all of this, especially with what's happening in the economy right now.
Among the causes, among the factors, a reliance on social media and online porn. But also, more young women are hooking up with each other or dating and marrying slightly older men, and heterosexual women are getting more choosy. Other troubling statistics about men come from a 2021 study from the Survey Center for American Life. They found the share of men who have 6 or more close friends, which in 1990 was 55%, by 2021 had shrunk by half. Meanwhile, those with literally zero close friends, which stood at 3% in 1990, has zoomed to 15%. An expert quoted by The Hill said this disconnect can have catastrophic consequences for young men. Well, those words reminded me of a conversation that I had over a year ago right here on CNN with NYU professor Scott Galloway.
But the issue is when you have a group of men, the lower half of attractiveness of men in online dating, which has doubled, now it's about half of relationships, and the top 20% of men in terms of attractiveness get about 60% of the interest. You end up with a group of men that are more prone to conspiracy theory, more prone to misogynistic content, more prone to not believe in climate change. So this is the American story. If it's written with a pen whose ink is failing young men, does not end well.
It's very interesting, however. So basically, this is a liberal, a hardcore liberal that is, and this guy's been going around. I've shown some videos from him where he's been talking about the economy and saying that we're headed for a living hell right now. He's all over the place. He was born in 1959. And so he's like, no, 1964. So he's actually the last of the baby boomers, although I think these people like to be called the Joneses, whatever. But it's just very, very interesting because most boomers are just sitting back and riding the decline right now because, they don't care. They just want their money. And it's going to have some serious implications because Gen Z is such a miserable group of people. We can see that they will tear everything apart. They will go. I mean, I had a Gen Zer threaten to poop in my driveway because of poverty. I blocked them. I got him out of here. But dude legit said that, okay, that's how I'm gonna go about it. Like, I'll poop in your driveway, and even if he can't get me, he'll get whomever he can, because these people are going to be so jealous, so furious, so angry, as AI changes things and makes it even more difficult for them to find jobs. As they're looking at the haves and have-nots, they're going to, they're turning to a life of crime right now. And there are people in my comments like, oh, well, what do you expect them to do? They have no choice but to steal. And it's unfortunate because a lot of these young people, they no longer value their lives. They absolutely no longer value their lives. And we're going to see some major implications for that in Western society. Like this is the absolute collapse of groups of people in Western society. Western society won't collapse, but groups of people in Western society will collapse. And it's going to be absolutely ugly. It's going to be brutal. And there's no really end in sight for it. The only thing that most people can really do is if you have the means to leave, the best thing to do is to absolutely leave and treat Western society as nothing more than a corporation where you can find a way to, use it to make money and then get away from it. And even that is becoming more and more difficult because so much of the wealth is being centralized where you will own nothing and be happy. It's an unfortunate reality, but it's a reality we all must face.
Existential crisis, failing young men.
As always, Professor Galloway was prescient. Back with me now is Scott Galloway. He's a professor of marketing at NYU Stern School of Business. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's the host of the Professor G podcast and author of multiple best-selling books, most recently, Adrift, America in 100 Charts. Scott, thanks for returning. Hasn't the advantage always been to those with the looks and or the money? What's changed?
First off, Mike, I just want to say thank you for raising this issue a year ago when a lot of media companies were afraid to talk about this for fear of it being pro-men was somehow being anti-women. Look, this is returning to the natural order of things. For the majority of history, a small percentage of men have had the majority of the mating opportunities. But in America, we decided to make a huge investment in what would probably be the greatest innovation in history, and that is in the middle class. From 1945 to 1947, 7 million men returned from war were discharged from the service, and we decided to give them the GI Bill, subsidized mortgages. We saw education rates go from 5 to 45%. They were valued, and we had such a strong manufacturing base that you had massive marriage and household formation. And some men were seen as more economically and emotionally viable. And you've seen the reverse happen with the offshoring of much of our manufacturing base, with a society that quite frankly doesn't value young men. When we talk about problems with people of color or women, we see it as a systemic societal problem. When we see problems or the stats that you just mentioned, we see it as accountability, or that men just need to level up. But married households and household formation are better citizens. They vote, they save at twice the rate, they're less likely to commit crimes, and we have fewer and fewer viable men. We have a dearth of economically and emotionally viable men. But the middle class is an accident. Unless you invest in it, it doesn't happen. Eisenhower decided to invest $500 billion in a national highway project that created tons of jobs. We have, and by the way, the tax rate back then was 91%. We raised money and we redistributed in social programs that made young people more economically viable.
And then, Scott, you toss in the influence of social media and how relationships today, they don't come from, in our era, happenstance and mingling, right? They come from swiping, and that further accelerates this issue. Am I right?
Oh, it's been the chaser to it. I mean, to have an honest conversation about this, we have to be honest, and that is that men and women have different mating criteria. One quarter of men saying economic viability is a key criteria in a mate. 3/4 of women say that is important. And when you're on a two-dimensional format, where now it's 1 and 2 relationships begin online, it used to be 1 and 4 just a few years ago, it gets distilled down to a small number of criteria. Specifically for men, it's does she look attractive? And specifically for men, is he able to signal his ability to garner resources in the future? An average attractive male on Tinder gets swiped less than 1% of the time. And there's 3 men on Tinder for every 1 woman. So you've distilled it, you've taken out one of the key components of mating.
Guys, some of you are like, oh, angry, it's not true. Guys, the average attractive man gets swiped 1% of time, 1% of the time on Tinder. 1%. Okay? 1%, guys. 1% of the time. I told you, guys, women were all competing for the same 1% of men.